Hello, everyone. My name is Edward Jie. I'm with Gaofeng Advisory Company. We are a management and strategy consulting firm with roots in China. So we help our clients to address issues related to China and also China's role in the world. Today, I'm very happy that I have a very good friend of mine on my show. His name is Ker Gibbs. And Ker is currently an executive in residence at the University of San Francisco in San Francisco, California, USA. Previously, he was the president for the Shanghai American Chamber of Commerce, or AmCham. Ker, hey, so good to see you again. It's been a while. How are you doing?
It has been a while, Ed. It's great to be with you here.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about what you're doing and sort of, what is a role of, executive in residence at a university? What is that?
Sure, the executive in residence. So I'm part of the business school. And so I do some teaching there. I teach in some of the courses on strategy and geopolitics and things like that. And then I also help with events. Right now, we're all getting ready for the APEC events that are going to be in San Francisco coming in November. And so we're all kind of getting ready for that. But the role also helps me, it gives me the time and the support that I need to work on books. And so the University of San Francisco has been very kind to support the book that I've just finished and that we're here to talk about today.
Fantastic. And before this role, you were the president for Shanghai AmCham. And I would say that was a very interesting and maybe a little bit challenging period, right? Especially from the standpoint of the US-China relationship. And you're right there, you're at the spotlight of this. And tell us a little bit about what happened during your tenure at Shanghai AmCham.
Yeah, you're right, Ed. I mean, it was a challenging time. But it's a challenging relationship. And I think that the work that we were doing there at the American Chamber, it was super important. I think it was particularly challenging during the Trump years, obviously the trade war and things like that. But it really kind of started to become even more challenging during the Obama administration as well. And so we had our challenges. But what we're trying to do really is to support communication between the two governments and do everything that we could to ensure the success of American companies here in China. And here's the irony is, and again, this is part of one of the themes in the book, is one of the ironies is despite all the tension and problems that we seem to be having between the US and China, the large American companies are actually doing quite well and have been for quite some time. And we can kind of get into the details of that. But having said that, we do understand the larger picture of the tension in the relationship and what are some of the causes of it. So yeah, very challenging situation. And we had, in particular, I mean, we had some very funny things. Well, I don't know if funny is quite the right word, but at one point, Ed, I'm sure you remember that we all woke up in the morning one day and discovered that the Trump administration thought it'd be a good idea to ban WeChat. I don't know,
Yes.
do you remember that?
I remember that, yes.
Oh my gosh. I had CEOs in my office that morning, waiting, Ker, what are you going to do about this? Because, it's just incredible. But I think it illustrates the gap in understanding between Washington, D.C. and the reality of business on the ground out here. I mean, we've got, the situation with WeChat and it's like air. Right? I mean, it's like shutting off your air.
And water, food.
And water, food. And how do you, if you're Nike and all of a sudden the American administration has shut off your air so that customers walking in the door can't buy anything. And then right next door, there's Adidas. Well, Adidas is a German company.
Right.
They're not subject to this ban. And so we had that kind of situation, and we had to explain, very, very, calmly and respectfully to the White House that, whose side are you on here? And we've kind of worked pretty hard to carve out some pretty decent market share, which we have. Again, some of these consumer product companies, Nike, Starbucks, Apple, all these companies are actually doing quite well here, but have worked hard to get where they are, and doing something like shutting off WeChat. Again, we want to be sympathetic to whatever perceived security threats the White House might have seen there. And we had extensive conversations with the White House, National Security Council, Treasury, Commerce, everybody who was touching that. It was mainly Treasury that was kind of driving that, and then they kind of kicked it over to Commerce. But it was challenging, Ed, I can tell you.
Yeah, that was quite an episode, Ker. I think you mentioned the book just now, right? And I think that the book is the new book that you just came out with. It's called Selling to China. And why did you decide to write the book? And also, what was the major thesis of the book?
Yeah, I decided to put the book together, as I was stepping down from my role at the Chamber of Commerce, and but I wanted to continue that work and extend that work and do things to be helpful in the U.S.-China relationship, because we all see what's happening here. And one of the things that we saw was that the dialogue had really become so dominated by the national security issues, and again, we don't want to pretend that those issues don't exist. They do. But what we're trying to say with the book is that, hey, wait a minute, let's not forget that we have a very robust commercial relationship here between the US and China. So let's make sure we don't lose that, or let's make sure we don't forget how important that is and how mutually beneficial that is. So what we're trying to do with the book, we're trying to give practical advice about the here and the now, what's going on the ground here in China, what does that look like? And we're trying to give kind of the general population a more nuanced view of what's going on here in China, good and bad. So I think all the authors, we were talking a little bit earlier about this. All the authors are very much pro-engagement, where we believe that engagement is not dead, despite what you might hear in Washington and to some extent in Beijing as well. We don't think engagement is dead. We think that engagement is the path forward, that we continue to engage with China. And if we can keep doing that at the business level, then we think that can play a helpful role. And we think that actually, some of the policymakers on both sides might actually be able to learn something from the book. These are C-level executives that have managed to be successful here in a very challenging environment, and have managed to adapt their businesses and fit in to a Chinese context. Now, I'm not suggesting that the U.S. government should drop its ways of doing things and do everything the Chinese way. That's not what we're saying, but we're saying that they may have something to learn by seeing how large American businesses have adapted, and try and take something away from that. So that's our hope.
The clients I work with, and also the people I talk to, are genuinely very concerned about the U.S.-China relationship, especially from the geopolitical standpoint, right? And so from your standpoint, what is your read on how U.S. corporations should deal with this kind of issue?
Yeah, they are concerned. I'm doing some advisory work myself, and yeah, I'm sensing that as well. They should be concerned. There are some really dangerous things happening right now, and so they're right to be concerned. But as far as the reaction to it and how the large American companies are adjusting, I think it's three things generally. One is certainly slowing down investment. One is, and to be clear, it's more hesitancy in the market due partly to the tensions, also partly to some of the domestic issues that are happening here. The overall economic slowdown, some of the lurches in the regulatory environment that they aren't quite sure about yet. So they want to let some time go by and sort of make sure they understand what the view is going forward. But I want to be clear, I think slowing down investment in this market is not the same thing as withdrawing from the market or exiting this market. I'm not seeing any sign of that at all. I think we're seeing at the SME level, you see some of the companies taking assets out of China, or some of them didn't survive COVID, frankly. They didn't have the depth of the balance sheet to kind of withstand some of the shocks that took place during COVID. But I'm not seeing any of the large companies completely exit this market. So we're not seeing that. The second thing that we're seeing is this. I think everybody's talking about these adjustments in the supply chain, and or if you want to call it de-risking or what have you. But I think it's actually deeper than that. It's more structural than that. Clearly, yes, we're seeing diversification of the supply chain. Some of these trends were actually pre-COVID anyway, more cost-driven than. And I think COVID kind of accelerated that, and now the increase in tensions has accelerated that even more. But more importantly, what we're seeing is that many of the large multinationals had been using China as a supply base and supplying not just the China market, the so-called in China for China model, but using China for the rest of the world and supplying other markets, largely Southeast Asian markets, but even US and Europe from China. So that part of it is changing. So we're seeing the multinationals really separate their businesses. So in China, more or less self-contained. And it's a troubling trend, frankly, because it really leads to more and more separation of the economies. It's sort of China and then the rest of the world. And again, I'm a pro-engagement person. I don't see that as a positive thing for China or for global business, but it is the reality. We are seeing businesses do that. And the third thing, which is probably the most troubling, is we're seeing corporate boards really looking at the extreme scenario of what happens in the case of a catastrophic event. And I think that the Russia-Ukraine thing has brought that issue front and center. So corporate boards are saying, look, it's an unlikely outcome, but it would be irresponsible to not have a plan. And so what we're seeing is corporate boards developing plans and not as much action at this point, but planning for what I might call sort of going asset light in China, or making balance sheet adjustments that would make a pivot less catastrophic. Would put it that way, in case of a catastrophic event. In other words, what we're talking about is you saw the businesses that had to adjust after Russia invaded Ukraine, and then business had to walk away from assets, from hard assets, plant and equipment. And so companies are looking at that. I think those are the three things that that you're seeing the most action on around the large companies as far as their reaction to the current environment.
So the title of your book is Selling to China, right? So in general, doing business in China, from your standpoint, is it hard or is it not so hard for American corporations? And what are the pitfalls that you've seen so far for American companies in China?
Yeah, and we well, first of all, I think it's actually a very good business environment. I mean, all this tension notwithstanding, and the current uncertainty in the market, and obviously we're seeing a downturn in the overall economy and some struggles here. We've got some debt issues at the provincial level, employment, but those are current issues. Long term, and you asked about the overall business environment. Actually, very good. I would say. I mean, I've started businesses here. I've managed businesses here, large businesses, small businesses. No, China is actually a very pro-business, pro-growth, pro-employment environment. In fact, you and I have been doing this for a long time, over 30 years, and I think over those early periods, I'd say it might have even been too pro-growth. In other words, growing too fast and kind of got too far forward on its skis. And what I'm talking about is sort of cutting corners around environmental issues, or just misallocating capital for the purpose of growth. But for large extent, those adjustments have been made. The environment, I'm looking out at a pretty blue sky right now here in Shanghai, and so those things have largely gotten under control. But number two, I think, and this point, it cannot be overestimated, the quality of infrastructure. I mean, China has simply made the investments that needed to be made to support and to stimulate that kind of growth. They say, I have 10 out of 10 when I talk to CEOs of large corporations, and they say, "Oh, why are you investing in China?" Infrastructure. This is the place. It's the high-speed rail, it's the subway system, the roads, the bridges, it's everything. So
Yeah.
so no, China's business infrastructure is definitely the envy of the world. So overall, yeah, I would say it's a positive business environment overall. That's not to say there aren't challenges. So there's certainly challenges over here, but overall, I would say fairly good business. And now, having said that, in the book, there's a lot of different themes in the book, and each industry. So each chapter covers a different industry and has a different author, and each author has their own views and describes their own challenges. So it's not a book about just all the good stuff and how wonderful it is. That's actually not what the book is about.
Sure.
It is about the challenges and mistakes that have been made over here. So you'll find all that in the book.
So the authors, basically wrote from their own experience, right? Because all of them, as I understand, and I know many of them, they're very experienced. They're deep into the fabric of the Chinese community. And so they're writing based on their own experience and perspective, right?
Very much so. And these are, so I was very careful about selecting authors. One, that, as you point out, these are the senior people. See, so everybody is operating at a C level, so they have a full view of the P&L, the whole business. The other thing is they're all managing large companies. So this is only a view of large foreign companies operating in China. So I want to be clear. I mean, there's much more going on in the Chinese economy than just that slice. In fact, arguably, most employment, right, is actually in the SME sector, not large companies, right? I mean, that's just in terms of the total number of people who are employed. So it's not a view of Chinese entrepreneurs or SOEs or all of those sectors. It's just large foreign companies. But the other thing, I wanted to get a set of authors that have a diversity of views. In other words, I wanted these are all people who are operating foreign companies, but they are not necessarily foreigners. So I wanted to get some people who were China-born, and some are not China-born, and they have a slightly different view on things. But what they all have in common is on-the-ground experience here. They also, and I was very adamant about this, is that they had to be able to write unencumbered. In other words, they couldn't be in a situation where they had to show a draft to their corporate communications person and get approval from headquarters or something. You and I both know, Ed, that
Yes.
Nobody's interested in reading corporate talking points. It's just boring and not really helpful.
Right.
So these are unencumbered personal views of these people, and they may disagree with each other, on certain points. But I did guide them. I edited the work and guided them towards certain themes in the book, which I felt were important to get across. And I'll just share one important theme, and that is the unique dynamic and the unique relationship here in China between government and business. And this is probably the most misunderstood part of China, both at the policy level and at the business operations level. In other words, when I go to Washington, D.C., they ask me about, SOEs and the 5-year plan and 20th Party Congress, and there's this misperception that the government literally runs everything, and that's just not true. They have a hand in every, and one would be misguided if you don't pay attention to the plan and what the direction the government is heading. But it's not the case that they operate everything at every level, right? So there is a misunderstanding there, I think, at the policy level, but also at the business operations level. And I don't know if you agree or disagree, Ed, but from my perch at the American Chamber, I saw a lot of CEOs come and go, and sometimes in quick succession. And if if they departed, less than 6 to 12 months, that's a fast turnaround for a CEO. 10 out of 10 times it had something to do with them misunderstanding the role with respect to government relations. In other words, if they didn't take that seriously, or they, I think there'd be a tendency, especially for a CEO coming from outside China, they'd say, oh, government relations, yeah, that sounds like a banquet every 3 months, get drunk with the party secretary and I'm done. No, it's not quite that simple. You really do need to have alignment with not just the party secretary, but a lot of other government officials that have their own KPIs and they have their own ideas about what they want to see happen in the district. And if you get that wrong, life becomes miserable, and you may not know it until it's too late. So again, the most common point of failure, put it that way, for new CEOs operating in China, likely has something to do with government relations.
So Ker, you said American companies see a lot of opportunity in China, right? And so can you be more specific on that? What kind of opportunities do American companies see?
Oh, I think there's a lot of opportunities here. I mean, again, most of the American companies that are operating, the large companies operating here, are still, well, COVID notwithstanding, right? I mean, COVID, the 3 years that we experienced at COVID, sure, obviously there were bumps and had different reactions depending on different sectors, and we could do another podcast on that. But overall, just looking at the long-term trends, they tend to be fairly successful, but it's sector by sector. I think if you look at the opportunities today, which I would argue that they're still there, and very much so in healthcare. Healthcare, huge opportunities, consumer markets, luxury, these kinds of businesses. And what's in common there is some of the larger trends. I mean, yes, GDP growth is going to be a struggle. I mean, it was a struggle last year for all the reasons we know about. This year, 5%, I don't know, it might be difficult to get to 5. But it's also true that the middle class is still growing. You're also seeing more urbanization, and these trends create opportunities, especially for foreign companies that can meet the needs of those consumers that are increasingly demanding better products, better quality, and so those, I think, play to the strengths of a lot of the foreign companies. But I wouldn't say it's across the board. I mean, there's certain sectors that are just not going to be very open to foreign. Obviously, the tech sector is challenged. It has been for quite a long time, and it's been getting worse. So there's that. Yeah. I think there's also a lot of pressure on the foreign companies in the services sectors. Including your sector, Ed, and the large consulting firms, and part of this is China is shifting. It's been shifting more and more towards self-sufficiency, but it's also shifting more. I mean, I don't know if I want to use the word. Well, just that it's back to the tension, right? It's the tension between U.S. and China, and there's nervousness, and so any businesses that are in the information business or data business, those are going to be more scrutinized right now. And so you've seen pressure on the consulting firms, especially on the due diligence firms. But even before the recent moves, even before that, you saw pressure on the law firms, which I would argue belong in that same kind of sector. So I think the foreign law firms have been having a hard time here. So it's not true that what's never been true, that all sectors are open or welcoming to foreign firms. I think you have to pick your sector, pick your battles, and again, back to my earlier point, make sure that your business is in alignment with where the current is taking you. And if you're out of that alignment, or if you're swimming against that current, life is hard.
Some people back in the US were saying that American companies who operate in China have to compromise their values in order to operate in China. Do you agree with that point of view? Have you seen cases of that?
No, I disagree with that strongly. I mean, I think you're always going to see stories or isolated incidents, that are going to get a lot of attention. But no, from my view on from the American Chamber of Commerce point of view, no, what we've seen is really a much more positive impact on the local environment. Certainly at the factory floor level, when you look at worker safety, worker standard, environmental standards. No, the global companies tend to bring their global standards and global practices to the China market. So I think that the impact on China has been positive. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to, though, Ed, or whether it's more the larger view of the national security issue. And on the national security front, for people who are challenging at that level, I would say, look, we are nowhere near that point. Yes, U.S. and China are having difficulties, serious difficulties, and those are challenges are about security and territorial disputes, and they're very difficult. But we're not at a point where we have to completely separate, and we're just not at that point yet. I think the U.S. government has taken some moves that are very specific, in terms of these so-called dual use technologies, and obviously, things that go into weapon systems, and we are at that point where the two sides are becoming more and more threatening to each other, and it's scaring the business community. But the business community, we obey the laws. It's like U.S. companies have to follow those laws, just the way they follow the laws here in China.
Yeah.
And so yeah, the two are narrowing the space in which the foreign companies have to operate. No question about that. But no, I think overall, again, big picture, last 30, 40 years, the impact I've seen on the local environment, as far as the business environment, has been generally positive. Yeah.
Hi, Ker. I think we first met some 30 years ago. Boy, time flies. So you've been associated with China for 30 years now, or more than 30 years. What do you think would be the most incredible change or changes that you have seen from China so far during this period?
Oh, you're right, Ed. I mean, the changes have been amazing, and I've been lucky to have a front row seat on all those changes. I mean, I came out. You're right. You and I met in kind of the early 90s, but I'd actually been to China before that. I came in the mid 80s, actually, right after college, and a lot of your viewers or listeners won't know this because they can't see me on a podcast. but I'm biracial, as you know, Ed. I'm biracial. So
they can see you. They can see you.
They can't. Oh, we're doing a Zoom. Okay, sure. So yeah, I'm biracial. You're Asian. So my mother is from China, and so I actually came out to China for the first time in 1985 because my mother insisted that I come, so that I could connect with her side of the family, and that was. So yeah, I mean, back in the mid 80s, I mean, it was still Mao suits, and the local people were just extremely curious about everything that was happening, and it was a fun time, I think, for everybody. It was a great learning experience for me, certainly, and for others. And then in the 1990s, as you referred to, I joined the Boston Consulting Group. I think we did not overlap. You were at BCG slightly after me, but I joined BCG in the San Francisco office and worked for our common friend Bob Chang.
Bob Chang.
And yeah, so he brought.
I joined directly in Shanghai.
Yeah, so you were in Shanghai. I was moved to Shanghai by Bob, and so that was a very much willingly. It was a fascinating time. So I saw in the 90s again. It was back to the point you made earlier, Ed. About business practices, and I think what we were doing at the Boston Consulting Group was really trying to transfer a lot of those management methodologies and try to help modernize, especially some of the state-owned enterprises. And so at that time, it was very clear that that the reforms that Deng Xiaoping had put in place were taking hold, and it was very clear what the direction was for China, and that was an exciting time, a lot of optimism. And that I think continued and accelerated really through the early 2000s after China joined WTO. And again, it was a very outward-looking China, a very optimistic China. It was a China that very much wanted to be highly integrated with the rest of the world. And I think what's going on now, it's hard to say. I think China is in a transitionary period, frankly, and it's a bad time to have this kind of tension and dispute with the U.S. and the rest of the West. And so it's a disappointing time for a lot of us who saw that trajectory and got quite accustomed to that trajectory and assumed that China would become just more and more integrated with the rest of the global economy. Now I think there's a choice. Is that going to be the continued trajectory of China, or will it turn more inward, more self-sufficient? And sadly, I think the tension is leading to actions that push China back into a more self-sufficient. I don't want to use the word isolated, but separated type of economy. And so we'll see. I think we're in a transitionary period. I can feel it. Yeah.
And Ker, so how would you like to see the U.S.-China relationship evolve over time, or into the future?
Yeah, I mean, as a future, I mean, again, I think that China has a lot to contribute to the global economy. I think, when we were talking about, the opportunities that foreign companies have here, we didn't even talk about the innovation that's happening here. I think there's a misunderstanding. Again, one of the reasons for having the book is there's a misunderstanding that it's only about the size of the market. And of course, it's a large market for almost every product. But it's also, I think a lot of the large companies are also in China to benefit from the innovation and the new ideas, new products that are coming out of China. So yeah, I mean, what I would like to see is a continuation of the path that Deng Xiaoping put China on, which was a path towards highly integrated with the rest of the global economy. To get there, though, we're going to have to solve some of these problems, and these security and territorial problems. I mean, here's the irony: is that they aren't new. They've been around for a long time. It's just the over the last 30, 35 years, we've found a way to agree to disagree, and how to have a more or less stable coexistence with these problems, and that's what we've kind of lost. We've kind of lost our ability to do that, and we're frankly in a danger zone. This is not pleasant for either side, and it's certainly not pleasant for the business operators who kind of feel like we're right in between these two whales that could, who knows what they're going to do at any moment. And so I think we've got to find a way. If we can't resolve those problems, we've got to find a way to stabilize and agree to disagree. And I know the two sides are working hard to get back to that place, but we aren't there yet.
So Ker, you are now back in the U.S. Physically now you are in Shanghai, but officially you are back in the U.S. Would you see another endeavor here back in China at some point for you in the future?
Oh, very, very, very much so. Very much so. I mean, yes, you're right. I'm at USF now, obviously University of San Francisco, and I'm there for most of the academic year. But I've actually kept my home here in Shanghai. So I still live in Shanghai. I'm in my home right now, and I would anticipate kind of going back and forth. I still have business interests here and friends here in Shanghai, and so I'll still be spending a lot of time here. And so, as far as getting involved in other things, I certainly would hope so. I still sit on one board here in Shanghai, and I'm also doing some advisory work for companies that have interests in China. So I do expect to be probably back and forth quite a bit, but very much open to other opportunities that come up. I love being here. I think it can have a good future, and I would look forward to that.
Well, thank you very much, Ker. It's been a wonderful and interesting conversation with you. But before I let you go, you said you are now doing some advisory work for some corporations. So in case if any of my clients or audience would like to get hold of you and want to get your service, how should they get hold of you?
Oh, I'd be delighted, Ed, and I'd be glad to work with you on projects as well. But I'm easy to find. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm quite easy to find, and be delighted to interact with your clients or you in the future. Yeah.
So on LinkedIn, just search your name.
Search my name. Yeah, I'm the only. I promise you, I'm the only Ker. I'm the only Ker Gibbs, and as far as I know. Yeah. But no, I'm easy to find.
Fantastic. That's very good. Ker, it's so nice to talk to you, and so good to see you again, albeit on the video. I hope I can see you in person pretty soon.
Terrific, Ed. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ker. Have a nice day.